Steam screamed from the espresso machine as the Saturday café buzzed with voices, cups clinking, chairs scraping. Then everything snapped. Chairs slammed back hard. Hot coffee flew, splashing down a man's sleeve. Laughter followed, loud, ugly, meant to be heard. Caleb Ward stood beside the small corner table, frozen for half a second as heat soaked into his skin. Across from him, his daughter Maya gripped her sketchbook with both hands, knuckles white, her breath coming in short, frightened pulls. The bully loomed over them, broad and careless, grinning as if the room were his stage and they were part of the joke. Burnt coffee and milk hung sharp in the air. A phone lifted, then another. Someone chuckled. Someone whispered, already imagining the clip online. Caleb didn't shout. He didn't argue. He didn't even step back. Something quieter happened instead. His shoulders settled. His stance shifted, just enough to be balanced. His breathing slowed, deep and controlled, like a switch had been flipped somewhere far behind his eyes. The laughter thinned. The room felt suddenly smaller, tighter. The bully leaned in closer, invading his space, waiting for fear. That was when Caleb finally raised his head and looked straight at him. Subscribe to Just Dad Things for more powerful single dad stories. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The mornings in Briar Hollow started before the sun decided it was worth showing up. Caleb Ward would wake to the soft rattle of the old heater and the faint drip. Drip, drip of the kitchen sink. He could never quite fix for good. The rental was small, the kind of place where the hallway was also the dining room, and the dining room was also the homework station. But it was clean. It was warm enough, and it was theirs. He'd move quietly so Maya could have a few more minutes of sleep. Coffee first, always. Not because he loved it, but because it gave him something to hold on to while he stared at the calendar and did the same math every single day. Rent, gas, groceries, school fees, the emergency fund that wasn't really a fund anymore. He didn't have the luxury of surprises. Caleb packed Maya's lunch with the kind of care other people reserved for gifts. Peanut butter sandwich cut neatly. Apple slices wrapped tight so they wouldn't brown. A little note tucked in because it cost nothing to remind a kid she mattered. He'd learned that love wasn't just the big moments. It was the tiny, repeated ones you showed up for no matter how tired you were. Maya padded out in mismatched socks and an oversized sweatshirt that used to belong to her cousin. Her hair was always a little wild in the morning, and she rubbed her eyes like she was trying to wipe the world into something softer. Did I miss the bus? She'd ask, even though she never had. Nope, Caleb would say, and he'd keep his voice steady because she listened to his tone more than his words. We're good. Some mornings she would smile, small and sleepy. Other mornings she'd go quiet. Those were the ones that scared him most. Maya was 8, but grief didn't care about age. It visited her in waves. In the hallway at night, in the school pickup line, in the middle of a cartoon when a mom character laughed too warmly. She slept with the hallway light on, not because she was afraid of the dark exactly, but because the dark made room for thoughts she couldn't name. And sometimes, when Caleb was tying her shoes or brushing her hair, she would ask, very casually, like she was asking about the weather, "Do you think Mom can see me?" Caleb learned to breathe through questions like that. He'd learned not to flinch. "I think she sees you," he'd tell her. "I think she'd be proud of you every single day." Maya would nod, like she was filing it away for later, and Caleb would feel something twist in his chest, because no kid should have to be that brave. After the drop, off came work, or the hunt for it. Caleb did contract security, which sounded better than it was. It meant standing in lobbies late at night, walking empty parking garages with a flashlight, watching monitors until your eyes burned, filling in for events where people treated you like furniture unless they needed someone to blame. No benefits, no guaranteed hours, no paid sick days. If Maya got a fever, he didn't get to be a dad and an employee. He had to choose which crisis would hurt less. His phone was always on. His ringer was always too loud. Every unknown number made his stomach tighten, because it could be a job offer, or it could be a cancellation. And lately, cancellations had been coming too easily. Client went another direction. Budget cuts. Not a good fit. Each one was a quiet shove closer to the edge. Caleb kept his face calm in front of Maya. He was good at that. Too good. He'd smile through the worry and joke about the weather and pretend he wasn't thinking about eviction notices or overdraft fees. But at night, when Maya was finally asleep, he'd sit at the kitchen table with the bills spread out like a confession. The numbers didn't change no matter how long you stared at them. They didn't care how hard you tried. They didn't care that he'd already lost the most important thing in his life. His wife, Hannah, had been gone for 2 years, but the absence still lived in their home. It lingered in the way Maya reached for a second hand when crossing the street, then remembered there wasn't one. It lived in the space on the couch that stayed empty, in the way Caleb sometimes caught himself turning to share a small moment, a funny headline, a new drawing, before reality hit like cold water. Hannah's illness had drained everything, the savings, the breathing room, the sense that life was predictable. Caleb didn't regret a dime spent trying to keep her here, but he'd be lying if he said it hadn't left him scraping for stability now. And stability mattered more than pride ever could, because stability was custody. Hannah's parents lived 2 towns over. They weren't cruel people, but they had their opinions. They worried about Maya. They worried about Caleb's hours, his finances, his situation. They asked questions that sounded polite but carried sharp edges underneath. Are you sure you can keep up with this on your own? She seems tired lately. Maybe she'd do better with more structure. Caleb heard what they weren't saying. Maybe she'd do better with us. Nothing had gone to court. Not yet. But the fear sat in Caleb's gut like a stone. One serious incident. One report. One complaint that made him look unstable or dangerous. That was all it could take to turn his life into paperwork and hearings and strangers deciding what kind of father he was. So Caleb kept his world small. He avoided conflict. He kept his head down. He swallowed insults at work. He smiled at people who didn't deserve it. Not because he was weak, because he was protecting the only thing that mattered. Maya. The café on Maple Street had become their little island of normal. Once a week, if he'd had enough hours, Caleb would take her there on Saturday morning. One warm drink, one pastry to split. Maya would pull out her sketchbook and draw people from imagination, brave knights, silly dogs, houses with big windows and flowers out front. Caleb would watch her, feeling something close to peace settle over him, like maybe the world wasn't always waiting to knock them down. The staff knew them. The owner would nod and call Maya artist. For an hour, Caleb could pretend they were just another dad and kid in a small town. Just another pair of people who belonged somewhere. That's why what happened in the cafe wasn't just embarrassing. It was dangerous. Because if the town decided Caleb was the problem, if a video painted him as violent, if people saw him as unstable, it wouldn't just cost him a job. It could cost him his daughter. And Caleb Ward couldn't survive that. The cafe manager's hands shook as she dialed the phone behind the counter. Her eyes kept flicking between the man sprawled on the floor, groaning and clutching his elbow, and Caleb standing a few steps away, calm but rigid, like he was holding something heavy inside his chest. "Police are on the way," she said too loudly. as if volume alone could bring order back to the room. The crowd buzzed with nervous energy. People whispered. A few customers edged toward the door. Others leaned in, hungry for clarity, for someone to tell them who was right and who was wrong. Phones were still out, though some hands had started to lower them, unsure now of what they were filming. Caleb didn't move. He stayed where he was, one hand resting lightly on the back of Maya's chair, grounding himself, grounding her. She hadn't said a word since the spill. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor, fingers worrying the corner of her sketchbook, until the paper bent. When the door opened again, it wasn't just uniforms that stepped inside. Elaine Porter entered with measured confidence, heels clicking softly against the tile, posture straight despite the chaos. She wore a charcoal coat tailored just enough to suggest authority without showiness. Her hair was pulled back cleanly, her expression composed, eyes already cataloging the scene like a checklist. She wasn't local. That much was obvious. Elaine had been in Briar Hollow for 3 days, overseeing a regional compliance review tied to several small businesses, including the café. She dealt in risk, liability, and worst-case outcomes for a living. When things went wrong, she was the one companies called to make sure blame landed in the right place. She took in the room in seconds. Broken chair. Coffee on the floor. A man on the ground being helped by another patron. Caleb standing quiet, marked by the most visible evidence of the incident. A soaked sleeve and a tense child beside him. Elaine's gaze lingered on Caleb just a fraction longer than necessary. "Who called this in?" she asked, her voice cool, efficient. "I did," the manager said quickly. There was an altercation. Elaine nodded once, already turning toward the arriving officers. She spoke in low tones, filling them in with what she believed she was seeing, careful to use words like potential escalation and customer safety. When she finally addressed Caleb directly, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Sir," she said, clipboard already in hand, "I'm going to need you to tell me exactly what happened." The word "sir" was polite, but there was distance in it. Space. Assumption. Caleb met her eyes briefly, then glanced down at Maya. "My daughter was scared," he said simply. Elaine paused, pen hovering. "I understand," she replied, though her tone suggested she was already moving past that detail. "But from what I can see, someone ended up on the floor. Witnesses say voices were raised." "They weren't," Caleb said. His voice stayed even, but the room seemed to lean toward him. Elaine's eyes flicked to the man being helped up. "Did you touch him?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He knew better than most how words could be twisted once they left your mouth. He also knew that silence could look like guilt. "He put his hands on me," Caleb said carefully. "I stopped him." Elaine made a note. "Stopped him how?" There it was. The question that carried weight. The question that decided narratives. Caleb could feel the imbalance pressing down now. Elaine had authority without ever raising her voice. She had the language of policy and procedure on her side. She had witnesses who hadn't seen the beginning, only the result. Caleb had none of that. He had coffee stains on his jacket. He had a shaken child. He had a history no one could see and a future that could be unraveled by the wrong interpretation. "I didn't hurt him," Caleb said. "I ended the situation." Elaine studied him, her expression unreadable. To her, he looked like a man who'd been involved in something messy and was now trying to control the story. She'd seen it before. People downplaying actions once consequences appeared. She turned slightly, addressing one of the officers. "We'll need statements from everyone involved, and any video footage." At the word video, Caleb felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. He could already imagine it. A clip without context, shared without mercy, stripped of everything that mattered. Maya shifted in her chair, finally looking up. Her eyes met Elaine's for just a second before dropping again. There was fear there, raw and unfiltered. The kind kids couldn't hide even if they tried. Elaine noticed it, not enough to change her approach, but enough to register. "Miss," Elaine said, softening her voice just a degree. "Are you okay?" Maya nodded quickly, though it was clear she wasn't. Caleb's hand tightened on the back of the chair. "She didn't do anything wrong," he said. "Not defensive, protective." Elaine glanced at him again, this time with a little more attention. "No one's saying she did," she replied. "But we need to establish facts. Facts. Liability. Responsibility." To Elaine, this was a professional problem that needed clean edges. To Caleb, it was his entire life balanced on how strangers decided to see him in the next few minutes. The officers began separating people, asking questions. Voices overlapped. The bully started complaining loudly about his arm, painting himself as the victim now that attention had shifted. Elaine listened, pen moving steadily. She asked sharp, specific questions. She challenged inconsistencies, but her baseline assumption remained the same. Situations like this didn't escalate unless someone let them. And from where she stood, Caleb was the common denominator. Caleb stayed quiet unless spoken to. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He focused on Maya's breathing, on keeping her calm, on keeping his own pulse steady. Because he knew something Elaine didn't yet. In rooms like this, control wasn't about volume or authority. It was about who could stay composed when everything was being taken from them. And Caleb Ward was very, very good at that. The cafe had settled into an uneasy quiet, the kind that followed chaos but didn't erase it. Chairs were pushed back. Napkins lay scattered across the floor. People spoke in low voices now, glancing toward the corner where the officers were taking statements, like they were afraid the tension might flare back up if someone spoke too loudly. Caleb stayed beside Maya, his presence steady, his attention split between the questions being asked and the small, silent signals coming from his daughter. The way her foot tapped too fast against the chair leg. The way her shoulders stayed tight, like she was bracing for something else to go wrong. Across the room, the bully's friend sat slumped at a table, pale and sweating, insisting loudly that he was fine. His bravado thinned with every passing second. He kept rubbing his chest, his breathing uneven, eyes darting as if he were looking for an exit that wasn't there. "I'm good," the man said again, though his voice cracked this time. "I just need some air." Then his words stopped mid-sentence. He pitched forward, chair scraping loudly as it tipped. A sharp gasp tore from his throat, and suddenly the cafe was chaos again. Someone screamed. Another person jumped back, knocking into a table. Phones came up instinctively, capturing the moment before anyone understood what was happening. Caleb moved before the sound fully registered. "Everyone step back," he said, his voice cutting cleanly through the noise. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. He guided Maya's chair away with one hand, turning her gently so her back faced the scene. "Hey," he said quietly to her, low and calm, like he was talking her through a nightmare. "Look at me. Count with me. 1, 2. Maya's eyes locked onto his. Her breathing slowed to match his. Caleb crossed the space in long, efficient steps. He dropped to one knee beside the collapsed man, already assessing skin tone, breathing, pulse. The man's chest hitched unevenly, shallow and fast, panic spiraling into something worse. "He's breathing," Caleb said, more for the room than the officers. "But he's hyperventilating." The older officer started forward, but Caleb held up a hand, not dismissive, just precise. "Give him space," Caleb said. "Too many people will make it worse." Elaine watched from a few feet away, her pen frozen mid-air. Caleb spoke to the man on the floor like he was defusing a bomb, not treating a stranger. Hey, he said, steady and controlled. You're okay. You're not dying. I need you to look at me. The man's eyes flicked toward him, wild and unfocused. Good, Caleb continued. Breathe in through your nose. Slow. Count it. 1, 2, 3. Now out. That's it. The man coughed, gasped, then tried again. Caleb adjusted his position, angling himself so the man could see his face clearly, blocking out the crowd. He kept his movements minimal, deliberate, like every extra motion might make things worse. Stay with me, Caleb said. You're safe right now. The cafe fell silent except for the man's ragged breathing. Elaine felt something shift in her chest. She'd seen emergencies before. People panicking, shouting, trying to take control without knowing how. This wasn't that. This was someone who knew exactly what he was doing and had done it before. A lot. The older officer noticed it too. He'd been watching Caleb since the beginning, the way he stood, the way he spoke. Now, as he stepped closer, his eyes narrowed with recognition. Pulses fast but steady, Caleb said, glancing up briefly. He needs air and space. No sirens in his face. The officer nodded without question and waved the others back. After a minute that felt like 10, the man's breathing slowed. Color returned to his face. His hand stopped shaking. There you go, Caleb said quietly. You're coming down. The man blinked up at him, confusion replacing fear. I thought. I know, Caleb said. Panic lies to you. Only when the situation was stable did Caleb ease back, careful not to draw attention. He stood, scanning the room once, instinctive, then turned immediately back to Maya. She was watching him now, her fear replaced by something else. Trust. Caleb knelt in front of her. You okay? He asked softly. She nodded. You were calm, she said, like it mattered more than anything else she'd seen that day. Elaine caught that moment. The way Caleb checked on his daughter before anything else. The way he didn't look for approval or acknowledgement. He just returned to his place, hands relaxed at his sides, as if nothing remarkable had happened. But something had. Elaine exchanged a glance with the older officer. It wasn't dramatic, just a look that said the same thing on both sides. This man is not who we thought he was. Caleb returned to his seat and pulled Maya's sketchbook closer to her, shielding it from the mess on the floor. You won't see any more of that, he told her quietly. I promise. Elaine stepped closer this time, her voice lower, less sharp. Thank you for helping, she said. Caleb met her eyes briefly. Anyone would have, he replied. But Elaine knew that wasn't true. He didn't explain himself. He didn't mention experience or training. He didn't say where he'd learned to stay that calm, while everyone else froze. He asked for nothing in return, except one thing. Can we keep this part away from her? He said, nodding gently toward Maya. She's had enough for one day. The request wasn't defensive or demanding. It was protective, father to the core. Elaine nodded, slowly. What can do that? As she stepped back, she felt the ground of her assumptions shifting beneath her feet. The man with coffee stains and silence wasn't just a bystander who'd gotten caught up in something messy. He was someone who carried control like a second skin. And for the first time since she'd walked into the cafe, Elaine Porter began to wonder if she'd been asking the wrong questions from the very beginning. By Monday morning, the cafe had scrubbed the coffee off the tile, stacked the chairs back in place, and tried to pretend the weekend hadn't cracked something open in Briar Hollow. But the town didn't forget. Towns like Briar Hollow never did. Caleb found out the same way everyone else did now, through a buzzing phone and a knot in his stomach. He was halfway through packing Maya's lunch when a notification flashed across the screen. A video posted from an account he didn't recognize. had already gathered comments like flies to something exposed. The clip didn't show the beginning. It didn't show hot coffee splashing onto a child's sketchbook. It didn't show the bully leaning over Maya, laughing while she shrank into her chair. It didn't show Caleb offering a way out with nothing but a calm voice and a boundary. It showed a man on the floor, and Caleb standing over him. That was it. 10 seconds. No context, no truth. Just enough to let strangers build their own story. Caleb stared at it for 2 heartbeats too long, then locked the phone and slipped it into his pocket like it was something that could burn him. Maya padded into the kitchen with her backpack already on, cheeks still puffy with sleep. "Pancake day?" she asked hopefully, because Mondays were hard and she still believed small joys mattered. "Not today," Caleb said, forcing a smile. "But we'll do something this weekend." Maya nodded, but her eyes lingered on him like she could feel the tension he was trying to hide. Kids always could. He drove her to school the long way, avoiding downtown, avoiding the café, avoiding the corners where he knew people would be talking. When he dropped her off, she hugged him tighter than usual, her small arms locking around his waist like she was trying to anchor him to her. "Love you," she whispered. "I love you more," he said, and meant it so hard it hurt. He didn't even make it back to his truck before his phone rang. The caller ID belonged to the security staffing company that fed him most of his contracts. Caleb paused with his hand on the steering wheel. Already knowing this wasn't a check-in, he answered anyway. "Caleb Ward." There was a short silence on the other end, the kind people used when they were preparing to say something they didn't want to say. His supervisor began, voice too careful. "I'm sure you've seen the video." Caleb stared straight ahead at the chain link fence around the schoolyard. Kids ran across the blacktop, laughing like the world was simple. "Yeah," he said. "We're getting calls," the supervisor continued. "Clients are nervous. They don't want incidents. They don't want headlines. You know how it is." Caleb swallowed. "There was no incident." "I'm not saying there was." The man rushed, but the damage was already done. "I'm saying perception matters. Liability matters." Caleb's grip tightened on the wheel. "So what are you saying?" Another pause. Another careful breath. "I'm saying we need you to step back for a little while, until it cools down." "Step back." Caleb repeated, his voice flat. "Just temporary," the supervisor said quickly. "A couple weeks. Maybe a month. We'll call when things settle." Caleb felt something cold slide through him. Temporary was a polite word for disposable. "I have bills," Caleb said. He hated that it sounded like pleading. "I know," the supervisor said, but the sympathy was thin. "I'm sorry." The call ended with a promise that meant nothing. Caleb sat in the truck long after, listening to the engine tick in the quiet, feeling the edges of their life start to fray. By lunchtime, the second video appeared. This one was worse. It had been slowed down, zoomed in, and paired with a caption that suggested Caleb was dangerous. The comments were vicious in that casual way strangers could be when they didn't have to look someone in the eye. "He's probably violent at home too. Kids shouldn't be around men like that. Should have been arrested." Caleb wanted to throw his phone out the window. Instead, he shut it off and went to work on a job he'd picked up last minute at a warehouse outside town. 4 hours of walking a cold concrete floor, checking locks, staring at shadows. 4 hours paid at a rate that barely kept up with gas. When he came home, the mail was waiting like it always did, stacked in the narrow slot by the door. An electric bill marked urgent. A reminder from the landlord about rent due. A medical statement from Maya's last doctor visit. Caleb didn't open them right away. He couldn't. He made dinner first. Mac and cheese with frozen peas. Because it was cheap and Maya liked it. He asked about school. He listened to her talk about a classmate's new puppy and a math quiz she was nervous about. He nodded in the right places, smiled when she smiled, pretended he wasn't calculating how many days of groceries they had left. After she went to bed, he sat at the table with the bills spread out. The same math again, but now with a missing number. No contracts meant no cushion. No cushion meant one mistake could topple everything. His phone buzzed again, this time with a number he didn't recognize. He answered, and a woman's voice greeted him with polished firmness. "Mr. Ward, this is Vivian Hart. I represent Mr. Dawson." Caleb's jaw tightened. The bully's last name. A name he'd heard shouted in the café when someone tried to calm him down. "Why are you calling me?" Caleb asked. "Because my client intends to press charges." Vivian said smoothly. "Assault, disorderly conduct, emotional distress." Caleb let out a short, humorless breath. "He spilled coffee on my kid and put his hands on me." "That's not what the video shows," Vivian replied, and Caleb felt anger flare behind his ribs. "We can handle this the easy way, Mr. Ward, or we can handle it the complicated way." "What's the easy way?" Caleb asked, already knowing. "You admit fault," Vivian said. "You agree to a settlement. You avoid court." Caleb's eyes closed for a second. Settlement meant money he didn't have. Court meant time he couldn't afford. Either way, it was designed to crush him. "I didn't do anything wrong," Caleb said. Vivian's tone didn't change, but something sharpened beneath it. "Then we'll proceed. You'll be served. And you should understand, Mr. Ward, that incidents like this can have broader implications." Caleb felt his stomach drop. "What does that mean?" "It means," Vivian said, "that if you have custody arrangements, evaluations, or any ongoing family considerations, public allegations can be considered. People talk. Records matter." The threat was dressed up as information, but it landed like a fist. Caleb didn't respond. His silence was the only thing keeping his voice from breaking. The call ended, and the kitchen felt too quiet, too small. He stared at the stack of bills again, then at the dark hallway where Maya slept with the light on. He could see the glow under her door. That night, he made calls. To his supervisor. To an old friend who sometimes knew about odd jobs. To a legal aid office that put him on hold so long his ear went numb. He didn't realize Maya had come out of her room until her small voice floated down the hallway. "Dad," Caleb froze. "Hey, sweetheart," he called, forcing warmth into his voice. "You should be in bed." Maya stepped into the kitchen in her pajamas, hair messy, eyes wide and sleepy. She looked at the papers on the table, then at Caleb's face. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. Caleb's heart squeezed. He stood quickly and crossed the room, kneeling so he was level with her. "No," he said. "We're okay." But Maya didn't look convinced. "I heard you say court." Caleb's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her the truth without giving her fear. He wanted to protect her innocence without lying. "It's grown-up stuff," he said softly. "Sometimes grown-ups argue." Maya hugged herself, small shoulders curling inward. "Is it because of that mean man?" Caleb held her gently, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "It's not because of you," he said, firm and certain. "None of this is because of you." Maya didn't answer, but she leaned into him like she needed to feel that promise in his arms. After he got her back to bed, Caleb returned to the kitchen and sat at the table again. The numbers blurred. The fear sharpened. Because now it wasn't just about work. It wasn't just about money. It was about the story people were telling about him. A dangerous man. An unstable father. A risk. And if the wrong person believed it, if Hannah's parents heard it, if the school heard it, if any official heard it, it could open doors Caleb had spent years keeping shut. He thought about the evaluation forms he'd filled out after Hannah died. The questions about stability, environment, temperament. The way his answers had been honest but cautious. He thought about how quickly life could turn into a folder in someone else's hands. Caleb leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time since the café, his calm threatened to crack. Not because he was afraid of the bully. Because he was afraid of losing Maya. And in Briar Hollow, it was starting to feel like the whole town had already decided who they wanted to believe. Caleb stopped checking the comments after the third night. It wasn't because they hurt his feelings. It was because they felt like hands, reaching through the screen, trying to pull pieces off him and label them violent, unstable, dangerous. The words weren't just cruel. They were the kind that could become real if the wrong person repeated them in the right office. So he shut his phone off more often. He kept his head down. He spoke less. He moved through town like he was trying not to cast a shadow. And still, the pressure found him. The first thing to go was Maya's art class. It was a small program at the community center, once a week. Cheap compared to most things, but not cheap enough when his contract hours disappeared. Maya loved it. She came home with charcoal smudges on her fingers and stories about the teacher who called her a storyteller with a pencil. Caleb told himself he'd cancel for only a month, just until things settled, just until the staffing company called again. He waited until after dinner, when Maya was relaxed and humming to herself as she colored at the table. He sat across from her with his hands folded, steady as if he were about to discuss something ordinary. "Hey," he said gently. "We're going to take a break from art class for a little bit." Maya didn't look up right away. "Why?" Caleb kept his voice even. "Just for now. Money's tight." Maya's pencil paused. She blinked hard, then nodded like she understood too well for 8 years old. "Okay," she said quietly. "I can draw at home." Caleb smiled, the kind of smile that was supposed to reassure a child, even if it felt like it was made out of cardboard. "Yeah," he said. "We'll make it work." That night, when she went to bed, he heard her shuffling around longer than usual. He didn't go in. He couldn't stand the thought of seeing her sad face in the glow of that hallway light. The next thing to go was the truck. It had been old when he bought it, older now. The paint was sun-faded. The driver's window sometimes stuck, but it was reliable. It got him to night shifts and job sites. It was a symbol of something he couldn't name. Independence, maybe. Control. The ability to keep moving no matter what. He parked it in front of the small duplex and stared at it for a long time before he took the pictures. The town's quiet pressed in around him. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The air smelled like damp leaves and distant river water. By the end of the week, a man in a baseball cap handed him cash in Caleb's driveway. The man didn't ask questions. He didn't care why Caleb was selling. He just wanted a bargain. Caleb watched the taillights disappear down the road and felt something inside him give way. Not dramatically, not with tears or yelling. Just a quiet snapping of a thread he hadn't realized was holding him together. After that, life became smaller. He started walking more, taking buses when he could. He avoided places where people stared too long. He started buying cheaper groceries, stretching meals. Oatmeal for breakfast. Rice and beans. Whatever he could make last. He learned which bills could be paid late without immediate consequences and hated himself for learning it. In the mornings, he still made Maya's lunch with care. Still tucked notes into her bag. Still walked her to school when he had the time. He practiced calm the way other people practice prayer. But calm was getting harder to find. One evening, after a long day of trying to chase down a legal aid appointment that ended in a reschedule, Caleb came home to find Maya sitting on the living room floor with her sketchbook open. She wasn't drawing. She was staring at a page she'd already filled. He sat down slowly beside her. "What's that?" he asked. Maya hesitated, then turned the sketchbook toward him. It was the café, not the cozy version they used to have. The page showed a table, a small figure with a ponytail, and a dark shape looming too big over everything. There was a scribble of black where the coffee had spilled. The lines were shaky, angry. Caleb's throat tightened. "That's really good," he managed. Maya didn't smile. She traced the edge of the page with her finger. "People at school were talking," she said softly. Caleb's chest went still. "Talking about what?" Maya swallowed. "They said you hurt that man. They said you're scary." Caleb reached for her hand. "Maya, I told them you're not," she rushed out, voice trembling. "I told them you're just my dad." But they laughed. The words hit him harder than any threat from a lawyer. Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her close, feeling her small body shake with held in fear. "You did the right thing," he whispered. "I'm not scary. I promise you." Maya leaned back just enough to look at his face. Her eyes were glassy but serious, like she needed the truth in a form she could carry. "My fault?" she asked. Caleb froze. "Because I wanted to go to the cafe," she continued, voice small. "If we didn't go, none of this would have happened. If I didn't bring my sketchbook, if I didn't." "No." The word came out firmer than he intended, and Maya flinched. Caleb softened immediately, cupping her cheek. "No, sweetheart. Stop. Look at me." Maya's lower lip trembled. "But weight was not your fault," Caleb said, slower now, making each word a stone he placed carefully in front of her. "Not even a little. You didn't make that man mean. You didn't make people talk. The only thing you did was be a kid who wanted pancakes and a safe morning with your dad." Maya stared at him like she was trying to decide whether she was allowed to believe that. Caleb pulled her back into a hug and held on longer than usual because he needed it too. After she went to bed, Caleb sat alone at the kitchen table with the same stack of papers and the same cold silence. He stared at the legal notice he'd been served. He stared at the bills. He stared at the faint glow under Maya's door. And for the first time a dangerous thought crept in. Not about the bully. Not about the lawsuit. About disappearing. About walking away from town, from attention, from every place where his name had become something people could twist. About finding a job in some remote place where no one knew him, where he could be invisible again. Invisible meant safe, but the thought didn't bring relief. It brought a sick, heavy dread, because he knew what invisible cost. Maya would lose her school, her routines, the tiny fragile stability he'd fought to build. She would carry the lesson that when the world got cruel, you ran. Caleb rested his elbows on the table and pressed his fingers to his eyes, breathing slowly, fighting to keep the hollow feeling from swallowing him. He could handle being misunderstood. He could handle losing money. He could even handle being hated. But he couldn't handle his daughter looking at him with guilt in her eyes, believing that her desire for one peaceful morning had ruined their life. Outside, the river wind rattled the window pane. The town slept. The internet kept talking. The system kept moving. And Caleb Ward sat in the dim kitchen light, feeling smaller than he'd felt in years, trying to figure out how to keep his promise to Maya when everything around him was trying to pull it apart. The truth didn't arrive loudly. It didn't come with sirens or speeches. It surfaced the way real truth often did, quietly, inconveniently, and too late for comfort. It began with a second camera. The cafe owner, who had replayed the incident a dozen times in his head since that Saturday, finally checked the security system more thoroughly. Not the front feed that everyone had already seen. the corner angle. The one pointed toward the register and the small tables by the window. That camera hadn't been shared. It hadn't been clipped. It hadn't been edited. It showed everything. The bully shoving a chair back deliberately. The spill. The way he leaned over a child and laughed when she flinched. The moment Caleb stepped between them. Not aggressive, not angry, just present. The warning. The hand on Caleb's chest. The shove that came first. And then, just as important, it showed what didn't happen. No punches, no rage, no loss of control, just restraint. By the time the footage reached the police department, the narrative had already hardened in the public's mind. But facts had weight, and this one hit like a dropped stone. Elaine Porter watched the full recording alone in a small conference room, her jaw tight, pen untouched on the table. She replayed it twice, then a third time. Every assumption she'd made unraveled frame by frame. She saw the moment she'd missed, the subtle shift in Caleb's stance, not toward violence, but toward protection. She saw how he placed himself so his daughter was shielded. She saw the space he gave, the restraint he chose when escalation would have been easier. Elaine leaned back in her chair, a slow, uncomfortable realization settling in her chest. She had been wrong. Worse than that, she had almost become part of the machine that crushed someone who didn't deserve it. The next day, the station lobby filled again, not with chaos this time, but with quiet expectation. A few reporters stood near the entrance. Some cafe regulars lingered outside, arms crossed, faces tense. Phones were out, but not raised as high. Caleb arrived with his shoulders squared and his expression calm. Though his stomach twisted with every step, he hadn't slept much. Maya was at school, and that was the only reason he'd agreed to come. Elaine stood at the front beside the officers, posture composed but different now, less rigid, more human. When Caleb entered, the older officer noticed immediately. He gave a small nod, respectful, almost reassuring. Elaine cleared her throat. "We're here to address misinformation related to the incident at the Maple Street Cafe," she said, her voice steady, carrying across the room. After a full review of all available footage and witness statements, it's clear that the initial narrative was incomplete. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elaine turned slightly, angling her body toward Caleb without hesitation. Mr. Ward acted with restraint and professionalism. He did not escalate the situation. He ended it. The words landed heavy and clean. Caleb felt his breath hitch just once. The older officer stepped forward then, his tone calm but firm. "I want to clarify something else," he said. "Based on observation and verification, Mr. Ward demonstrated a level of control and situational awareness consistent with prior professional training." Someone in the back whispered, "Military." The officer didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. "What matters," he continued, "is that Mr. Ward protected a minor and avoided unnecessary harm." The bully, now standing stiffly beside his attorney, shifted uncomfortably. His earlier confidence had evaporated. Without edited clips and loud claims, he looked smaller, cornered. Elaine didn't look at him when she spoke next. "Charges filed against Mr. Ward will be dropped effective immediately." A hush fell over the room. Conversely, Elaine added, turning her gaze at last, "Charges will proceed regarding harassment, assault, and filing a false report." The bully's attorney leaned in to whisper something urgently. It didn't help. Caleb didn't feel triumph. What he felt was release. Elaine stepped forward one last time, her voice quieter but no less clear. "Mr. Ward," she said, "I owe you an apology." Every camera in the room focused. "I judged you based on incomplete information and allowed institutional caution to override fairness," she said. That was wrong. She turned slightly so the apology wasn't just personal, it was public. "Your professional standing will be restored, Any contracts affected by this incident will be notified of the correction. Caleb swallowed. He nodded once. Thank you, he said. No bitterness. No victory lap. The room shifted again, not with noise, but with something like shame. People avoided his eyes. Others met them briefly, uncertain how to reconcile who they thought he was with who he clearly was. Outside, the river wind moved through the trees like a long exhale. Caleb stepped into the daylight feeling lighter than he had in weeks, though nothing about his life had magically changed yet. Bills still waited. Work still needed rebuilding. But the lie had been pulled away, and that mattered. As he walked to his car, the older officer fell into step beside him. You handled yourself well, he said quietly. Caleb gave a faint smile. I had a reason. The officer nodded. Usually is. Across town. Maya sat in her classroom, unaware that the story people were telling about her father was finally changing. And for the first time since the café, the truth was louder than the noise. The change didn't come all at once. It arrived the way real stability usually did, quietly, in small confirmations that life was no longer sliding out from under Caleb's feet. The first call came 2 days after the charges were dropped. Caleb was standing at the kitchen sink, scrubbing a pan that didn't really need scrubbing, when his phone rang. He almost let it go to voicemail. Habit. But something in him said to answer. Caleb Ward, he said. This is Mark from Northline Security. The voice on the other end said, more confident than it had sounded weeks ago. We've reviewed the updated information. All of it. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, bracing himself. We'd like you back on rotation. Mark continued. Actually, we'd like to put you on a steady schedule. Night coverage at the distribution center. Same hours. Steady. The word felt unreal. When would you need me? Caleb asked. Tomorrow night, if you're available. Caleb exhaled slowly, the kind of breath you didn't realize you'd been holding for weeks. I'm available, he said. After the call ended, he stood there in the quiet kitchen, letting the relief settle into his bones. It wasn't a promotion. It wasn't a miracle. But it was solid. It meant rent would be paid. It meant groceries wouldn't be counted down to the last can. It meant breathing room. More calls followed, not many, not all at once, but enough. Short-term contracts that turned into longer ones. Clients who had been hesitant now sounded almost embarrassed, offering work without mentioning the video at all. Caleb didn't ask questions. He just showed up. At the cafe on Maple Street, a new sign appeared by the door. It wasn't flashy, just a simple printed notice in a clean frame. Respect is required here. Harassment will not be tolerated. The owner added it quietly, without ceremony. When Caleb and Maya passed by one Saturday morning, Maya stopped and read it twice. That's new, she said. Caleb nodded. Yeah, looks like it is. They didn't go inside that day. Not yet. But they stood there for a moment, side by side, and that felt like progress. Around town, the tone shifted. People who had looked away before now nodded in passing. Some offered quick apologies, awkward and sincere. Others didn't say anything at all. Just met Caleb's eyes with something like respect and then moved on. Caleb didn't dwell on it. He wasn't interested in redemption arcs or public approval. He was interested in normal. Normal meant Maya coming home from school talking about her day without hesitation. It meant fewer late, night phone calls that made her pause in the hallway and listen. It meant laughter creeping back into their evenings, tentative at first, then easier. The art class reopened its enrollment the next month. Caleb waited until he had 2 full paychecks before telling Maya. He sat across from her at the table, heart thudding harder than it should have for something so simple. How would you feel about going back to art class? He asked. Maya's eyes widened. Really? Really? Caleb said. if you want." She didn't shout or jump. She just smiled, slow, bright, like something precious being returned to her. "I want," she said. That night, Caleb lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of the house. The heater kicking on, the wind brushing the siding. Maya's soft breathing down the hall. The fear that had lived in his chest for weeks had loosened its grip. He thought about the truck he'd sold, about the months ahead, about the fact that rebuilding took time. But he also thought about what hadn't been taken from him: his dignity, his bond with his daughter, his ability to stand still in the middle of chaos and choose restraint. Briar Hollow didn't turn into a different town overnight. Gossip didn't vanish. The internet didn't apologize. But something essential shifted. People had seen what happened when they rushed to judgment. They'd seen how easily silence could turn into harm. And some of them, enough of them, learned. One afternoon, as Caleb walked Maya home from school, she reached for his hand, her fingers warm and confident in his. "Dad?" she asked. "Yeah. People aren't being weird anymore," she said, thoughtful. "They smile now." Caleb squeezed her hand gently. "Sometimes it takes a while for people to catch up to the truth." Maya nodded like that made sense. "I'm glad they did." So was he. Life hadn't become easier, but it had become steadier. And for Caleb Ward, steadiness wasn't just comfort. It was hope. The house was quiet in the way only nighttime could make it. The heater hummed softly. The sink ticked as it cooled. Outside, the river wind moved through the trees, gentle and steady, like it was finally on their side. Maya sat at the kitchen table in her pajamas, coloring carefully inside the lines of a fresh page. A mug of cocoa steamed beside her, little curls of chocolate, scented warmth rising into the air. Caleb stood at the counter stirring his own cup slowly, watching her without her noticing. Moments like this felt fragile, earned. He carried his mug over and sat across from her. For a while, neither of them spoke. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was full. "Dad?" Maya said at last, not looking up from her drawing. "Yeah, kiddo." She hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been waiting. "At the café, why didn't you yell? Or get mad like that man?" Caleb thought for a moment. Not because the answer was hard, but because it mattered. "Because yelling feels strong," he said finally. "But it usually just makes things worse." Maya colored another careful line. "So what's real strong?" Caleb smiled softly, knowing when to stop, and knowing who you're protecting. She looked up at him then, eyes curious and serious all at once. "You were protecting me?" "Always," Caleb said. "That's my job." Maya nodded, satisfied, and went back to her drawing. Caleb watched her for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair and let the piece sink in. They didn't talk much after that. They didn't need to. The world outside could keep arguing, posting, judging. Inside this small kitchen, there was only warmth and quiet, and the simple certainty that they were okay. Caleb rinsed the mugs and turned off the light. Maya padded down the hallway, pausing to hug him around the waist before heading to bed. "Good night, Dad. Good night, sweetheart." He stood there for a second longer after her door closed, listening to the house settle, feeling the future stretch forward. Not perfect, not easy, but steady. And that was enough. If this story touched you, subscribe to Just Dad Things for more single dad stories, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.